Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Jane the Virgin, Season 1, Episode 18, Chapter 18. In this episode, alright, I really want to just call this one Jane Gets Gaslit, because everybody around her is acting like she doesn't have a perfectly good reason to be fucking pissed. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Lauren for commissioning this episode and also for your flexibility, because I had to push it back one day due to my poor puppy having surgery and getting a tumor removed. So yeah, it's a Wednesday, which I don't usually record on Wednesday. But I was so bummed to have to put it off, you guys, because I watched this episode like right before my recordings started, and I had so many thoughts and I was dying to share them, and I felt very frustrated. So here I am today. I am definitely going to go through the episode because, of course, there are going to be other plots that we need to talk about. But there are times, depending on the episode, where there's like an overarching theme that really catches me for whatever reason. I really like it. I really hate it. It makes me angry, or it surprises me. And I have to sort of get that out of the way first. And this one is going to be I got to get it out of the way first because it makes me so mad. Y'all, what the fuck? What the fuck, really, though? Like, okay, so the previous couple of episodes, we have seen a lot of Rafael being disengaged. There was an episode where he was picking up the phone during breakfast, and it was sort of put forth that maybe he was still hurt by the fact that she like hadn't answered his proposal, and he was kind of like purposely shutting her out because he didn't want to face his hurt or resentment toward her. But then it's continuing in this episode, and it is an actual Lamaze class that he is at. And he gets a call and gets up and leaves her alone in the room. Now, the issue for me isn't him leaving her in the room, which you might be surprised by. But honestly, if you leave her alone for a couple minutes and then you come back in because you had to take a call, it's fine. She'll be without a partner for, a few minutes, whatever. The issue is that she asked him to turn off his phone and he didn't do it. And when she pointed out that she asked him to do that, he didn't even come up with an excuse. He just said, well, but that was a really important call. That's not what she said, sir. She didn't accuse you of lying about the importance of the call. She pointed out that she made one very simple request of you during the hour in which you're meant to be paying attention to only her, and you didn't do it. And then later, at another event, you did. Literally end of. There is no further, it is wild to me the way that this episode is written, so that it sounds like they are trying to make it be that Jane is overreacting. And I don't think she is at all. So she has this moment, and the whole thing is that apparently the hotel has lost its liquor license. I don't know if I missed something. I don't remember it being mentioned why this happened. Losing a liquor license for a major corporation, a huge hotel that has a lot of oversight, that shouldn't happen. If you have somebody who's managing it properly, it gets renewed, like, you know, shortly before it's about to run out. Like, you set everything up in advance. So I want to know whose fuck up it is that they don't have a liquor license, first of all. And second of all, the whole thing comes down to the county commissioner who he needs to sweet talk into getting the liquor license reinstated, which, again, because we don't know the circumstances of why they lost it, it feels really weird to me that this all depends on a really personal interaction and it's not like anything bureaucratic. And that's not to say that's not how it would work, but because I don't know the circumstances, it feels weird. And the whole situation is that Jane is, she is like having an important text conversation. I feel like she's texting with her mother about Easter or something. She is texting with Rafael because he cancels dinner on her for that night. But the interaction that she has with the commissioner, this woman was really rude. She says like something to her about like, oh, wow, finally off your phone. If you can manage to get me a clean knife and not use your phone for it. And, it's so funny because, like, I have run into this exact type of person. This is no exaggeration at all. People will really talk to you like this. And I was so proud of Jane for standing up for herself. And then it turns out that this woman is the one that Rafael has to, like, basically kiss ass. And he puts Jane in the position of apologizing, which Jane is already willing to do, despite not being in the wrong at all, because this woman was horrifically rude to her and now is really enjoying lording it over her that she has this power. So Jane has an Easter dinner coming up, and it's a really important holiday in her household. You know, her grandmother is a devout Catholic. It was important to Jane as a little girl because of that. And it's a whole thing. And she invited Rafael and is really excited about it. And then he tells her that the way to smooth things over because of the screw up with the commissioner is for her to go to the like Easter brunch that they're having at the yacht club instead, which leads to a really confusing scene for me. And I want to ask y'all's opinion on this. I wasn't really sure why, but like Jane gets sort of sent off with the county commissioner and isn't with Rafael for any of this afternoon. I couldn't understand exactly how this is set up, that she is his date and is brought with him, but then they get seated at totally different tables and have like completely different experiences. And I was just sort of like, what's going on here? But it's like completely on her to make this right, which she does, but not for the reasons that you would think. So she knocks it out of the park. This is a great scene, by the way. She starts talking all about the art world. She's talking about, like, what is that horse dancing? Dressage. And I'm like, where is this coming from? I will be honest. I thought for a second this was like an imagination sequence where Jane is imagining how great it would be if she were actually nailing this conversation, but instead we'll cut back and she will be struggling through it. Not so. It genuinely goes this well. But unfortunately, because the county commissioner is not kind and doesn't like Jane, the fact that Jane is killing it only makes her more angry, which is just a very unfortunate situation. That said, there are other women at this table that I feel it's going to be highly advantageous that Jane made such a good impression. So I'm hoping this will work out for her in other ways, maybe. Sometimes just making rich friends is all you need to suddenly like be in a completely different echelon and succeeding, you know? And it's very infuriating that that's how it works, but it truly is that simple. April says, seems like gendered activities like men go off with cigar. Oh, I forgot. She says, go smoke a cigar or whatever you do at a yacht club. You're right. So they just, how fucking weird. Isn't that weird that we're still doing this? Like, ugh. You're right, though. Thank you, April. So the way that this works out is not that Jane nails this little convo. It's simply that she overhears an embarrassing conversation between the commissioner and her husband. I don't remember what his deal is, like what he does for a living. But basically, he is going to be leaving that night to make this like big deal in Palo Alto, and their daughter's like birthday is that night, and he's just going to miss it. And she sort of like, first of all, is like, what the fuck? It's her birthday. How could you do this? And then, is your mistress going to be there? And he just stares her right in the eye and says, yes, she is. Do you want a divorce? No, I didn't think so. And walks away from her and leaves her in like total humiliation. It truly is like an awful, ugly moment that it makes sense why she was so vicious to Jane, because she's so deeply unhappy. But the thing that's so like annoying is a lot of us are going through shit and we don't just like completely unleash on those around us, you know? So it's an explanation. It's not an excuse. And she sees that Jane is standing right there, and Jane admits that she did hear everything. And she tries to be like, maybe in exchange for you not saying anything about this, because we have a certain reputation that we want to keep, you know, uphold, I will give your boyfriend the liquor license. And Jane is like, I wasn't going to say anything either way, like liquor license notwithstanding. And I was honestly concerned for a second, because she seemed like such a bad person that I thought she was going to be like, oh, well, good. Then no liquor license. You know, I thought she was just going to be like really snotty about it. But I think that she is used to working like quid pro quo, and probably thinks if she were to do that, then Jane would be free to go and say whatever. And so she has to cover her bases, you know. As far as she's concerned, it would be like contractual if she does the thing she said. And I don't know what recourse there would be, but in her mind, you know, a deal's a deal. So Jane solves the problem for Rafael. But let's be real here. This problem, it is a big deal for Rafael. It is understandable why he is so preoccupied by it. Having been married to a man who sold like international and boutique beers to restaurants and stuff, I was around for certain places having lapses with their liquor licenses. In Philadelphia, it's a special case because there are only... What they have decided is that they have as many liquor licenses as they're ever going to what's the word I want? Hand out. I can't remember the word I want, but hand out. They aren't writing any new ones. So if you want to open a business that has a liquor license, you have to buy a premises that is being sold with the liquor license. Like if a restaurant closes, they will include the liquor license in the property when you buy it. Or you put bids on a liquor license that exists from a place that is selling and or going to be closed or whatever. And it is a really weird system. I don't know why it's like that, but it does result in liquor licenses lapsing in Philly a lot more often than it should in any other part of the world, because they made it so weird and complicated. And there have been times where like they let it lapse and somebody else has been able to sort of snap it up. And I don't remember how that works, but then they have to figure out a way to get it back. And so I know that this can completely like wreck a restaurant, a hotel, like a place this luxurious, they can't sell liquor. I mean, that's a death sentence. I get it. But she wanted him to turn his phone off for 1 hour. And just because he didn't want to miss this call, you're telling me the commissioner calls and leaves a voicemail and he can't call back? You're telling me that they're like missing this call and not being able to pick up immediately, that was going to be the end of it? I just don't buy it. And I don't appreciate how like cavalier Rafael is about the fact that he will be there for his kid when the time comes, when nothing about his actions here is showing that he will. And what this comes down to is a conversation that Jane has with her grandmother. And we see a flashback of her kind of doubting about Christ rising from the grave and all of that, and sort of asking questions. And her grandmother saying, you can poke holes in anything. It's not a question of like all the answers being obvious or provable. It's about faith. And that's fine. For God. That is not the way to have a relationship with a person, especially considering it's not just a relationship. You are already pregnant. And like, what is she, 3 months at this point? 4 months? Like, she's getting into the depths of it. And it was really gross to me how her reactions to this kept being sort of played off by Rafael, and then her grandmother and her mother both don't really want to hear her detailed explanations of what's bothering her. And the same thing happens with the conversation with Andy, who she finds out, by the way, Andy does know who she is and like joined the writing club because of her, I'm assuming, which is really fucked up. But she talks to Andy about feeling like she just says, I'm having all these doubts. And it's such a generic way to say it. And it's so like, doubts is a very vague term. She has experiences that have happened recently and repeatedly of what his priorities are and what his behavior will be. This is not coming out of nowhere. This is not her overreacting. This is not her being hormonal. I could not believe Andy like says this. And of course, Andy has her vested interest in making sure Jane stays with Rafael. But nevertheless, because the vibe of the rest of the episode felt like everybody is telling her to like give him another chance and to have faith in him, I just couldn't help but, in the context of all of it, it felt like the show was saying she was being overdramatic about it all. And at one point, her mother even says, like, you know, when you lose faith in somebody, you're ready to end it completely. Don't you remember what happened with Michael when you lost faith in him? And I'm like, why are you framing it like that? Saying it like when you lost faith in him completely divorces his actions from the events. It's bizarre to like say it like that. She lost faith in him because he was faithless. He lied often and repeatedly to her face about a thing that was a massive priority and life-changing to her. So just being like, well, you lost faith in him. When you say you lose faith, that is usually accompanied by an understanding that like that was an internal, like an internal shift of perspective that you had where you came to some realizations. That's not exactly what happened here. The situation didn't stay the same, but Jane was growing and started to see clearly. The situation dramatically changed because she found a piece of information that was external and was nothing that she would have like been able to come to any conclusion on her own about. She needed that info and he wasn't going to give it to her. He was going to keep lying and he was fine with doing that. So I am really pissed that all of this, like her saying, you said you turn your phone off. Rafael doesn't even answer her about that. He just says, but it was an important call. So that's kind of the point. You turn it off so that you don't know you're missing an important call. That's the sacrifice you're making for an hour, is that you go into a state of not knowing whether or not. And so what it is if you're not willing to shut your phone off for an hour, there is another thing that is more important that you are willing to sacrifice this for. And you don't think that proving to Jane that you will be there for her in one of the small capacities that your presence is actually required for, by the way. She could do a lot of the stuff for getting ready for a baby on her own. But a Lamaze class is actively meant to be like partners. How much is Jane actually asking of him compared to what he's delivering? I don't feel like she's demanding. She's just not that type of person. So the idea that she wants him to make eye contact over breakfast, that she wants him to be listening, that she would like him to turn his phone off like she asked, and that she is being unreasonable is the stuff that broken relationships are made of. This is the shit that I wish to God I had understood when I was a lot younger so that I didn't waste my time. Because these are tells. You know, some people call them red flags. Red flags for me indicate like genuinely abusive behavior. I use the word tell because it's not necessarily that these signal somebody is a bad person. It signals what they care about. It signals what their priorities are. It signals where their headspace is and where you factor in on their agenda. And Jane isn't at the top of his list. And the fact that he kind of bites her head off at the end of this episode really upset me, even knowing that it's coming from a place of hurt because of what happened with his mother. I get that that's what's going on there, but God, it bummed me out because he is not just rude to her, but again, it feels like a continuation of this weird gaslighting that's happened the whole episode. April says, I agree that I felt at odds with how the episode painted questions about Jane's perspective and what I felt was obviously happening. Yeah. Like I don't know if maybe eventually we'll circle back and get a bit of like validation for this. I am hoping we will, but I'm not really going to hold my breath on that. It just felt like they wanted to write an episode about having faith in somebody, and they didn't do a good job showing us any reason to sustain that faith. And I know that's kind of supposed to be the point, but the whole like way that her grandmother replies to her concerns with, quote, you can poke holes in anything, unquote. What about when the other person's just punching holes themselves? Like, you're not supposed to pay attention to that or listen to that? The thing is, I don't like Rafael that much to begin with. And his priorities have felt at odds with hers so often that I've already been having my severe doubts about whether this is a good idea. And she has this conversation with Andy where she says that her and Michael, their priorities matched up. They both wanted the same things. And her and Rafael don't. And frankly, for me, that's the end of the question. It's understandable why so many people think that this shouldn't be a deal breaker. And I get that romantically, you're not supposed to let anything stand in your way. But if you are with somebody who wants completely different things and cares about totally different things, it's ultimately doomed to me. Unless one of you gets won over to see things the other person's way. And the person that would be won over is always the one that's more willing to compromise and more passive and more interested in keeping the peace. And that's so unfair. It's just a really, like, going into anything with that attitude of like, eventually I'll convince them I'm right about. If you go into a relationship like that, that is a guarantee of resentment. It's like, no matter what it is, I'm going into this relationship hoping I can convince him to move away from his family, or I'm going into this relationship hoping I can convince her to have kids, even though she has said repeatedly she doesn't want to. There are so many people who do that. They jump into things and they think that it's all just going to work itself out because you guys care about each other. And it's like, being married is not just about caring about somebody. Being married is about wanting to partner up with a person that you believe is going to be there for you and support you and get you where you want to go in your life. And that is not being like mercenary. That is just what the point is of choosing a partner. It is because you work well with them towards a common goal. It's really that simple. And if you don't even have a common goal, what do you got? Like, genuinely, what are you doing? And at the end of the episode, they had talked about his father earlier, and her saying, like, was your father there for you though? He was gone all the time. And Rafael didn't really like seem upset that she framed it that way. But he says to her, I am not my father. And she's like, I know that. And again, he's like, do you? And he keeps having lines like that where he's sort of challenging her, but he's not actually saying anything. And I just find myself having no interest in engaging him because he's acting like a brat, like just spoiled brat. But at the end, he says to her, because she repeats to him, you're not your father. And he says, what if I were though? Like, why is that a bad thing? I want to leave something to my kid like my dad left for me. And honestly, if you're sitting here after listening to that story, Rafael, and this is your response, I don't know what to say to you. So the whole thing with his mom, he finds an email address from a private investigator. He emails her and he is worried he's not even going to hear back. As he puts it later, that's what he thought worst case scenario would be. But she replies and they meet. And it turns out that she was less than 3 hours away his whole life. And that his father paid her $10 million to abandon her son. And she did. And I had to put you out of my mind if I wanted to get on with my life. I remarried. You have a half brother, actually. And I felt really bad for Rafael here because I am partnered with somebody whose parents abandoned him, and they lived literally 2 blocks away and never came to see him. I'm not kidding. 2 blocks. And he would go a year without setting eyes on them. And it makes me murderous to think about. I don't understand how anybody could be so willing to walk away from a responsibility that they brought. Like, they decided to bring this person into the world. And if you're going to do what's best for your kid and give them up to people who care for them, at least have the decency to, like, not wave it in their face over and over how little you give a shit by being right there. Leave. Just leave. Like, really leave. But doing it like, and them finding out you had every opportunity. How old is Rafael now? You know, he's like meant to be in his early 30s, I think. She was paid $10 million to stay away. Well, he's a grown-ass man now, and I don't think his father's going to just ask for his money back. But setting all that aside, which is awful enough, and Rafael is fucking devastated, I don't feel like Rafael ever asks the question why his father was so convinced she shouldn't be part of his life. Like, he is angry at her for taking this money. I don't blame him. He should. But he goes on in a later scene to defend his father to Jane, a man who paid his mother to go away. And I don't understand why he doesn't seem to have a problem with that. Like, I genuinely am not getting why he isn't angry at his father also. This is an everyone sucks scenario. Just because she took the money doesn't mean that she was the bad guy and his dad was the good guy. His dad was shit for offering it and she was shit for taking it. So why is he not holding his dad accountable? Is it just because he's dead and he just feels like he can't mentally hold his dad responsible? Because I know that happens, you know, and I am not like this, but I know a lot of people that once a person is deceased, you're not meant to think badly about them ever. Like, it's somehow disrespectful or even almost blasphemous to do. And just the fact of their death has like made it so that you can't criticize them. It's bizarre. I don't think it's like healthy. I don't get why anybody ever thinks that way. But maybe that's what's going on here, is that, you know, yeah, his dad was wrong, but his dad is also dead and left him this hotel and it's all he has of him. And he's trying to prove himself. And that's a big part of this as well with like abandoning Jane, is that his father had kept telling him how useless he was and how much he squandered his life and that he had no potential at all. And Rafael is going to work the rest of his life trying to prove his father wrong and ruining all his other relationships to get the validation of a person who is physically unable to give it to him because they are dead. And that is a really rotten place to be. It really is. As somebody who often feels motivated by my father's disapproval, because I got called lazy all the time. I had it insinuated a million times that I just was like, I didn't like to work and that I ate too much and all of these things that were like really unfair to put on me at such a young age. And it was the kind of thing that as I got older, some of the things I did because I felt like everybody thinks I do this, so I must do this, like overeating. And then there were things that I actively like pushed myself too hard to prove wrong. But my dad's gone, you know, and he doesn't see that I made a business for myself. This wasn't happening when he was alive. And I will never get the satisfaction of him telling me, oh, so you built something yourself and you worked really hard. Good for you. It's not happening. And it bums me out. I won't lie. But I'm also coping with that and aware of it. And Rafael seems to really not understand his own emotions and his reactions to things. So he is so hurt by the way his mother behaved that he decides him and Jane are too different and that they should split up. And because I don't want them together, I don't have anything against the breakup in practice, like, or not in practice, in principle. I think it's a really bad idea to do it like this. And I resent that he's the one initiating it because she deserves to break up with him. Him dumping his pregnant girlfriend, that's fucked up. Like, genuinely, what is wrong with you? He's acting like this isn't him abandoning his child. He says to her something like, maybe focusing on being great parents is what we should focus on. And I'm like, you know, for her, that means being a loving family and a team. So again, their priorities are not lining up and he doesn't care what hers are. He just tells her what things are and she's been going with it. And she has not been standing up for herself the way she deserves at all. I don't blame her for just walking out. But it also bums me out a lot that he just went through what he went through meeting his mother for the first time, and he doesn't tell Jane about it at all. He just lashes out at Jane and pushes her away and keeps all of that to himself. From like a woman who also found out that she was lied to about a parent and everything. She is the person to understand, and you're not going to like engage with her on this particular topic at all. It just feels really silly to me. So that's pretty much everything to do with that plot point. But I just wanted to register my profound disapproval at the way the show decided to make Jane like a bit of a joke because she's, quote, overthinking things, unquote, when her like her worst self, the one that she brushes off her shoulder eventually, is absolutely correct. Everything she says, she is not being unreasonable. She is being observant. And that's all there is to it. So let's back up a little bit and talk about what the fuck is going on with Roman Zazzo, because it turns out that dude is Roman Zazzo. And I had said, like, is it possible that his twin brother was killed? And I'm assuming that's what had to happen. But if that's not, if he didn't have a twin, I don't know what to think about the body and like how that was pulled off. And do twins have the same fingerprints? Like, I'm assuming they don't, because the fingerprints are what they use to prove it is Roman, right? So how did they mistake the body that they had for Roman if it wasn't the same fingerprints? I'm sure all of these questions will get answered. But what it comes down to is that somehow Petra has like decided that he is Roman, and I don't really feel like I get where she made that leap. And I don't know if that's just me, but it just felt like really sudden that she is telling Michael about her suspicions. And I was like, I didn't know this was a suspicion that you had. Where is this coming from? And she, you know, the whole thing, like Michael doesn't realize, or the test results for the fingerprints don't come back until after Petra has gotten into the elevator with who she thinks is Aaron and winds up in the car with Roman. But I thought by the time she was in the car, I thought like he was going to have basically made his move in the elevator and abducted her from there. When we see her in the car, she is still operating under the fact that he is Aaron. And finally, Roman drops the act and is like, come on, you know it's me. So I don't know if Roman killed his own brother or if he set his brother up to die in his place because he knew somebody else was going to try and get him. But I am really intrigued to see where this goes, because I genuinely don't know anything about where the connection is with Zaz and like his supposed connection to the cartel and Sinrostro. Like, is that where he's taking her? What is the deal there? Or I don't know. And in Michael coming to the hotel, he comes to take the cup from Petra and runs into Jane. And he has his date sweater on, she points out. And he mentions he does have a date. And then he says something about Andy. And she's like, huh, Andy, what's her last name? And he says, and it's the same girl. And then you just kind of go, maybe it's a coincidence. But then he specifically mentions she got in touch after she saw we broke up on Facebook. So Andy is aware of what Jane looks like and who she is. And the only reason that she could possibly have joined the group is to like stalk Jane and get a feel for what her deal is. I don't see any other way to interpret it. Like, it's simply not a coincidence. There would be no reason to lie to Jane and not tell her that you know her ex and that you're dating him unless you are trying to be shady. And my assumption is like, she just kind of wants to get the measure of Jane and see what it is that maybe drew Michael to her and perhaps emulate some of that. Because when you're young and you're insecure and there's a guy that you're convinced is the one, you will sometimes attempt to mold parts of yourself to be a person that he likes better. And that's not great and it's not healthy, but it's a thing a lot of us do and hopefully eventually learn is not worth it. So a part of me feels bad for Andy, but considering how vulnerable Jane has felt in that group already, to find out that this person has an ulterior motive when she's sharing her writing, which is something she feels very self-conscious about, that's a real bummer. I felt bad for Jane on that. Like, so the other, like, there's two other small subplots going on. We have got the one with Alba and her being into that guy from physical therapy. And it turns out when Jane goes to like the different church for Easter Mass and then to the yacht club, she sees that he is a priest. And yet Alba called him and asked him out and he accepted. And I love when she like freaks out about the fact that she asked him out on Easter. Like the whole thing is extra funny because she buries the lead that he already accepted. And so at first it's just kind of like, well, just like, I don't know, call and like erase the message or something. But no, they already went through this. And I guess he was just not planning on telling her that he's a priest, which this is going to be a whole thing. I think Thornbirds is actually mentioned by the narrator, which is funny. But the thing that bothered me here is the fact that apparently we're just going to ignore the way Alba acted towards Shamara. And so there is no, like, what's the word I want here? There's just really no consequences. They had a fight and Shamara moved out and they've both moved on. And I mean, that is how life works. Sometimes you just let shit go. But I am just personally unsatisfied because I felt like she was being so shitty. And Shamara, for her part, is dealing with the mother-in-law. And it turns out there's a couple things happening here. First of all, is that this mother-in-law actually walked in on Shamara with Rogelio when they were like in their teens, which resulted in her knocking over a lamp in surprise, which then electrocuted and killed her cat, which is really awful. Just truly. So there's already that issue. And that is what Shamara thinks this woman is so bitter with her about, because she is so snide. The woman playing Rogelio's mother looks vaguely familiar. I can't place her, but God, she is so good at being passive aggressive. And she makes a couple of digs at how glad she is that Jane looks like her father instead, and that you must really love living here. What an upgrade. Things like this. It's just so snotty. She's sending her off to fetch water for him and like yelling after her, room temperature, 2 lemons, and just treating her like a waitress. And Rogelio is watching all of this and not calling her on any of it. And this is the part that bummed me out, that eventually does get resolved, but I don't know how many of y'all ever spend time on Reddit. I don't spend very much, and I already spend too much. But there are a lot of stories on there of women who are being disrespected by their mother or father-in-law. It could be either one. And the husband doesn't say jack shit. And it's a really like gross situation to me, because if you care about a person, you don't just let that slide. And if you let it slide once, that's already setting a bad precedent. But if you let it slide repeatedly, then you just don't care about this person and you're a coward. And that's like all it is. So I'm watching Rogelio completely like crumple under his mother. And I'm already feeling kind of pissy at the way he's letting his mom talk to her. And then come to find out, he lied to his mother about Shamara telling him that she was pregnant. So his mother is under this assumption that Shamara hid the pregnancy and then had Jane, and he was never given an opportunity to be involved, and blame Shamara for him not being in his daughter's life, when in truth he was told and tried to convince Shamara to get an abortion. She didn't. And then she didn't let him into his daughter's life because she figured he didn't want her, so it's none of his business anymore, which I understand. And his mother is appropriately horrified to find out how extensively she's been lied to and that her son isn't really who she thought he was. And yet she then has to go into, well, he does want more children. How old are you anyway? And gets really personal with Shamara about whether or not she can have children and whether or not it's reasonable for her to box Rogelio in by being as old as she is and it being such an uncertain thing, whether she could even get pregnant. And like, basically she insults Shamara so much that Shamara leaves. And when she is left alone with Rogelio, his mother says, I was right about wives number 1 and 2, and I'm right about this one too. And you can see that that actually does have kind of an effect on him. Like, it is like her judgment hasn't been wrong. So the fact that she's saying this, he's a little bit shaken by that, I think. But when Shamara comes home later, he says that he sent his mother home because she was just being so disrespectful, and that he loves Shamara, and that if they decide that they're going to have kids, they can just get a donor egg or whatever. And it's a weird like moment here, because Shamara, when she left in a huff, she went to a bar and she's sitting there having a drink, and I think his name is Marco comes in. And Marco is the guy that she went on a couple dates with, who's like a famous footballer. And he is sitting here looking fine as hell, charming as hell. And he does the old, well, you know, I would never treat you like that, baby. I would never let somebody talk to you like that. I would kick them right out of the house. I would throw my drink in their face and bash their face into a wall. I would absolutely beat a man to death if he ever looked at you weird. Like, just that kind of thing that gets you, even if you know that it's like either insincere or just dramatically exaggerated. But you're very vulnerable and you're feeling upset and you're feeling like you had expectations that somebody didn't even try to reach. And she just goes for a kiss with him. And truly, it was so brief. It was so brief. And she realized immediately that she had fucked up and got up and left. And I appreciated that a lot. And for me, this is something that she can keep from him. I think it's going to come out. So I don't feel like this is a good choice, really. But I do think if I were her, I would write that off as like, I had a bad moment and he really doesn't need to know. Because it's the sort of thing, I think there are secrets like this where you can make a bad decision, and you could either get it off your chest to make yourself feel better because you can't stand the guilt of what you did, or you are so certain it was a horrible mistake that you will never repeat again that you decide to keep it to yourself because you know it's going to add a layer of paranoia to your relationship, and you will never fuck up like that again because you've really learned. And they don't need to go through the torment of constantly wondering because it's not a thing they need to be concerned about. And that's kind of where I'm at with this. I don't feel like she has any lingering feelings for Marco, really. I don't think it was about him at all. She felt like Rogelio did not have her back. He was lying to his mother from the outset, and she didn't even know that, which is shitty. And then when this woman is like going at her about her age right in front of him, he doesn't like immediately shut her down. He lets Xiomara leave. And it really feels like he's just doesn't have her back. So I get her, just especially considering how sensitive she is about getting older in general, you know, that finding out he lied to his mom is bad enough, but then this woman continues to press her about a really sore subject in the way that she did, in this sort of sneering attitude. That is going to really get you where it hurts. And I just think she had a moment where she started to self-sabotage and caught it, realized, oh, this is what I do. And that's growth. That's when you're like really moving forward and you're like, oh my God, I see that I do this. It was just so brief. She regretted it so completely and so immediately saw it for what it was that, to me, this would be the kind of thing that it's reasonable to never tell him about. But the question is, will Marco never tell him about it? Because Marco seemed, I don't want to say that he is kind of trying to break them up exactly, but the fact that he showed up at this bar where she happened to be all by herself, and she tells him that like she just moved in with Rogelio, and immediately he's like, and yet you're here alone. There's a lot about this that feels to me like he's got his eye on her and is sort of trying to wriggle in there still. This doesn't feel like a coincidence. So I am wondering if he isn't going to go ahead and say something. Now, I don't know what to think about how Rogelio would feel, because Rogelio is so vain and so territorial about so many things. I have to imagine he would immediately like kick her out. And I don't want to see that, man. I really don't. But I also don't know what Zoe is going to do with this on her shoulders, because she doesn't seem like the kind of person that carries this kind of weight well. She is a very direct person most of the time. And she kept that massive secret about Jane's father from her, but it like clearly tore her up to do that. And I feel like something like this, I don't know. I don't know if she's going to be able to keep it from him. And what happens if a secret is like eating you up, it begins to create a sort of rift, and you can't help it happening. It's a weird distancing because you need to sort of steer away mentally from what is upsetting you and the subject matter that's going to like get you thinking about it or talking about it. So you're doing these weird things in your mind while your partner is just trying to relate to you in a regular way, and they're not aware that you're doing all of these things in your head. So you begin to seem distant to them because you are kind of distant, because your head is in a different place. And then you start to like build a wall between you and your partner if you feel guilt because you're trying to not put yourself in a position where you can hurt them like that again a lot of the time. And this will result in you like wanting to be less vulnerable and connect less. And it just winds up feeding on itself. So even if she doesn't tell him, if she doesn't handle it well, it could still ruin things, even if he doesn't find out. And I think he will. So all this to say, I don't think all secrets are an inherently bad thing in a relationship. I think sometimes keeping a secret is the kind thing to do. However, it's really easy to tell yourself it's the kind thing to do just because you don't want to face the thing. And it may be that you deserve to face the thing. It's really, you know when it's the right thing and you don't, though. You just have to get past all the bullshit you tell yourself. So I really feel, because that was true self-sabotage versus Shamara talking to Jane about how she self-sabotages by losing faith in people, which is disgusting and absurd. And I'm so over it. Truly I am. And they've made like Michael seem so much more appealing because he has not been around. So purely by virtue of the fact that he isn't Rafael, I'm feeling more warmly toward him, even though I don't like Michael any better. Not really. Both of these dudes, I am uninterested, frankly, in her being with either one of them. But we've got these two, I guess. Fine. And I want to know if they're ever going to add a third in there. Jane doesn't seem like the kind of person who gets seduced by 3 dudes at once. She's not even really entertaining things with Michael at the same time. He is still interested in her and in his heart still kind of hoping for her. But she isn't keeping him on the line or anything. She's not toying with him. So it would have to be a really particular circumstance that would bring a third guy into her life in that way. I'm wondering if maybe like through work or the writers group or something. So yeah, I feel like I covered every plot point in this episode. I'm just trying to look around and really quickly like pull through it and see. But yeah, that's pretty much everything. You guys, truly am so mad at Rafael. And I remain mad at Alba. And I don't want to feel this way. But Alba's treatment of Zoe, and then her insistence that like Jane just have faith without even really knowing what any of Jane's issues are. It just all comes together for me of just being like, oh, right. You have like really traditional views on things that I think are gross. And then Zoe is trying to be supportive of her daughter. And I do appreciate that she doesn't crow over the fact that they're having problems, which Jane clearly kind of expected. But then she turns it around to try and act like Jane is the one self-sabotaging. And that is victim blaming to me. So I didn't like that either. Everybody's on my bad side this week. Jane is the only pure one. All right, I'm going to wrap up. But thank you again, Lauren, for commissioning this. And thank you for being flexible and letting me push it back. I really appreciate it. I hope that y'all are enjoying the coverage. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.